Okay. So I'll pass on to Nicola to sort of do introductions and do the talk that we sort of came to see.
Sure. So as you probably just heard me talking to Lawrence, I'm the quality coach at Cazoo. I started there in September last year and was brought in to be a third coach alongside an agile delivery coach who's another permanent member of Cazoo, and a technical practices coach who I believe you all know and love, Marco, who is in as a consultant. Now it's just myself and the agile coach there. Marco finished up at the end of March, and he's going to be coming back specifically to do a coaching program with us and just do training rather than be there day to day as a technical coach. So we've got quite a coach heavy practice at Cazoo, and I've not really come across anywhere else that has gone to that level of effort to put different coaches in place to help teams be the best they can be. And my focus is specifically on the quality side of things. So a little bit about my background. I've been working in software companies since 2003, so a scary 17 years. I started out working in a small software house where there weren't really roles. Everyone did a little bit of everything because there were 20 of you to keep everything running. So I was in there initially just on the support desk and training our customers to use our software. But I inevitably got involved in back-end support, learning how to run our servers, learning how to write our bespoke solutions in PHP and JavaScript, because you had to overlap, otherwise the company wouldn't keep running. The term full stack didn't exist at the time. It was just a very collaborative company. But the skills I gained there have helped me along my career path. I started specializing in testing at the point that we realized our one annual release a year with 3 months of prep work wasn't going to scale alongside onboarding our clients to new software, rolling out changes, and still trying to make new sales. That was around, I think that was around 2008, and that was my start of becoming a professional tester. Since 2008, the entire industry has gone through so many changes. James Whittaker of Microsoft declared that testing was dead and testers were just another type of developer, and that started the software developer in test movement. Since then, software developers in test have gone in and out of fashion of, well, they're just developers that test their code. The leadership at Cazoo described to me they've kind of gone full circle. They've gone from working in businesses with huge outsourced test organizations to internal testers in teams, to internal consulting test teams that sit separate to the engineering teams, to developers in test, to no testers, and they're coming back around the other side and are taking more of a coaching model. And the idea is that I help coach about quality across all the product engineering teams, but each team also has an embedded quality engineer whose role is not a gatekeeper, and it's not to act as someone that tests what the developers produce, but it's someone that helps the whole team raise their game about what quality means. So this is a presentation I gave introducing the formalization of that to Cazoo in January this year, with a couple of tweaks added for bits that we show in our internal bootcamp that you won't have seen before either. So if I take you through this, there is an idea of defining what quality means, And my favourite definition comes from a guy called Gerald Weinberg, who wrote a couple of books about tech consulting in the 1980s and the 90s. And he has a succinct definition that's used throughout the test communities and the quality communities, that quality is valued to some person. If someone doesn't value what you've made, if it doesn't mean anything to them, it doesn't matter the technical, beautiful code or technical levels of performance quality or load quality or anything like that. If it's not valued, it's ultimately not quality to the human it's intended for. Now, outside of the test community, that phrase isn't that well known. Most people, and I've had fun conversations with Marco about this as well, because these definitions ended up in Marco's book on agile tech practices. Most people take their definitions from the ISTQB, which is the International Software Testing and Quality Board. Because testing is a supportive activity of software development, in industry you don't tend to get asked to interview to show your GitHub commits or the latest library that you've helped build, because that expectation isn't there so much. And it's hard to qualify those answers of, well, you helped build quality into a particular piece of software, prove which bits you did. That's not very tangible. So the ISTQB gets referenced a lot because they have put together glossaries and manuals and training programs and certifications around what it means for testing and quality. And their definitions don't tend to be that succinct. So testing is a process of life cycle activities, both static and dynamic. And by that point in the sentence, most people are already bored. Static and dynamic, to anyone outside of ISTQB, generally gets met with confusion. And even when you explain that static activities are testing diagrams, testing written down requirements, whereas dynamic activities are testing working components and prototypes. Even when you explain that, you hit levels of confusion of, well, how do you test a document? That kind of doesn't make sense. The ISTQB certify testers by getting you to go through a 3-day course, learning lots of terminology. And at the end of it, they give you a 35-question multiple choice test. And if you score more than 30, they certify you as a tester with a big tick. That obviously in the real world doesn't mean much. And I am friends with some of the authors of the original ISTQB syllabuses. They don't stand behind the ISTQB anymore. And they don't stand by what the organization does anymore. I think it's the way it gets referenced is one of the reasons that most people encounter very poor experiences with testers that just do tick box stuff on scripts and don't think outside the box, because that's literally what the ISTQB is checking. So I don't think I ranted too much, just a little bit. Their definition of quality is a little shorter. The degree to which a component or system satisfies the stated and implied needs of its various stakeholders. My problem with that statement is in the 2 words implied needs, the 1 word implied. If you are implying anything, you don't know that you are actually meeting the quality of value to the person that you're trying to deliver a system to. You are making assumptions and implications, and those don't tend to meet with good quality. So my definitions is that ISTQB is the most frequently referenced definitions, but they're not actually the definitions of quality and testing, and actually Gerald Weinberg comes closer.
Sorry to interrupt, if
Sure.
you don't mind. I mean, I would like to have a mixture of both of those two for quality, to be honest, because quality is value to some person. When you say that, well, if the person doesn't get value from it, right, then it's not quality. But it wouldn't have been created if the person doing the creation didn't value it. So I'd argue that the first definition there says the stakeholders, and I think the second one needs to say what that person is.
The reason I like it being ambiguous is it helps drive the quality conversation of who is the person you're trying to serve. Because a lot of the time with projects I've worked on, an example from about 10 years ago, building workflow software for a construction company, and it's always essentially the people paying the bills that are giving the requirements, because they're the ones arranging the contracts, making sure they get value for money, and making sure they get something that makes their workers' jobs easier, because that was the point of the software. If you actually went and spoke to the people that used the software day in, day out, what was quality to them and the improvements they needed were completely different to what the bill payers were giving us. Quality to some person, if we'd have built according to the person with the money and the requirements, we would have met their definition of quality, but they weren't the ones using the software, they were the ones purchasing it on behalf of their employees, and their employees would have still been frustrated and unable to do their jobs. One of the reasons I don't like kind of defining stakeholders is it tends to put people like that bill payer into the conversation more than the person using the service or the system. But yeah, it's a good one to open a discussion with. And ISTQB has very set definitions of quality and processes you should go through. And any software that's built either code-wise or quality-wise, going by a tick list produced by someone else, I think risks missing the point of the people and their needs that the software is being built for.
I guess it's just the fact that, for example, when you talk about maintainability, right, the end user doesn't care about maintainability, right? Nope. It's us as developers do. So definitely, like, stakeholders, probably not the correct word, and yeah, it's just because there's so many different people who it could be for. So, but yeah, that's all.
No, completely. And I think having those discussions about quality is some value to some person, you can start defining the people that are involved and what quality is to those. And I think your end user, their only care about maintainability is if they have a problem, it's fixed quickly, and if there's an update, it doesn't interrupt their work. Whereas on the technical side, it's easy to maintain, easy to update. No one wants 3 hours deploy cycles to, I don't know, change a bit of text on a website or something like that. I went around our quality engineers that we've hired at Cazoo. So at the end of last year, I think we had three permanent quality engineers, 2 from Codurance and 2 from another agency. January this year, we had another 4 or 5 quality engineers start. So now all our quality engineers are permanent. And as part of doing this deck within Cazoo, I asked our quality engineers what their principles that guide them during their work, so that we could share that with the organization. And these are some of the quotes that they came up with, that quality is a mindset, that you need to understand the why before the how. The quality is valued to some person was reworded as it's in the eye of the beholder. The ones at the bottom, quality is a team responsibility and within the team itself. It's very important for us at Cazoo because the quality engineers are not gatekeepers. They're not, in a lot of companies I've worked at, quality is treated as the final sanity check before something goes live. And that's not our aim at Cazoo. Quality really is in the team. It's in the way the team works together and the way the team communicates and collaborates, as well as in the code that is produced and deployed. And if you have ever read anything about testing and quality from the test community itself, you may have come across a flame war of testing versus checking. I'm going to come on to that a little bit later. There is a kind of big argument in the testing and quality community that testing is not the same as quality. Testing is an activity. Quality is a measurement of success, be it qualitative, quantitative, or subjective. And the other thing is that checking is not the same as testing. And the best analogy I can come up with is my daughter was an IVF baby, and part of the treatment before having her involved daily blood tests to check hormone levels. And they're called blood tests, but they're not testing a hypothesis. They're literally checking a level of hormones so that medications can be tailored appropriately. And that's the kind of difference that ends up getting argued a lot in the test community, that checks are very valuable to check known things you wish to protect about, or known things you want to be highlighted if they change. But that is not the same as testing. Testing is about forming hypotheses, trying them out, learning information, sharing that information, forming new hypotheses that lead into further tests. So any questions on the kind of what is quality side before I go on to what we look for in our engineers? I'll keep going then. So what is a quality engineer at Cazoo? These are the qualities that we've been looking for in our quality engineers. Communication skills is a huge one. We're following a philosophy of shift left testing, which is to move the testing activities as early in the development life cycle as possible. So we need people that are confident to communicate with all kinds of different roles, be it product management, be it other teams such as finance or marketing, as well as those technical communication skills within the engineering team. We've looked for people that are good at using a risk-based approach. We have avoided the stereotype kind of tester of everything's a problem, everything is the biggest problem in the world, and it all needs to be fixed now. We're a startup. We're doing things with the business and releasing new features that we don't know whether they'll work yet. So we need our quality engineers to focus on the risk-based approach of with new features, what's likely to go wrong, how likely is it to go wrong, and when problems are found, what is the risk if we leave those problems in place and don't address them till users encounter them. And obviously that level of risk-based decision changes between teams. a bug on I don't know, a banner on the homepage may be far quicker to fix and far lower risk than any form of issue in our consumer finance application process, because we're dealing with people's real live credit scores. We looked for people that had both technical ability and critical thinking ability. So our quality engineers have a varying level of coding skills, but they all have the ability to critically question feature requests, requirements, and even if they aren't as confident writing code themselves, they're perfectly able to pair with developers and be walked through code and ask appropriate questions about the what ifs. If they see the code with a particular logic, they can help talk through potential edge cases or negative cases around that logic, which leads nicely into the logical reasoning. No one wants an illogical quality engineer. No one really wants an illogical engineer generally. And curiosity is a huge one, especially in the world of a startup where, as Lawrence's question to me earlier on was, is Cazoo still moving at the same pace? We have been moving at an incredibly quick pace, and one of the things we're relying on the quality engineers for is to make sure they don't get too tunnel visioned just within what the team's doing, but stay curious about everything that's happening in other product teams and how that interplay between product teams might work. So Aurelia's been on our consumer finance team, and she's exited as we've had a whole load of interplay between consumer finance and checkout teams, and there's been some huge overlap between what they're doing. If either team had been head down just into their side of it and not curious about the wider way that things are interacting, we wouldn't have produced such good quality. So there's a couple of quality engineer bad smells for me, and these are some fun stereotype cartoons that were created for the Ministry of Testing, and a little ebook that they put together about tester types. I've just picked a couple of them. If you want to find out more about the test community in any way, shape or form, the Ministry of Testing is UK based but has a global reach, and actually they ran an online 24-hour test conference last week with 1,000 testers attending. They are very practical and probably the best alternative to ISTQB I have in terms of learning about the quality space. So the bad smells, the automator gets described as just wants to automate things, doesn't want to think about end users, doesn't want to think about the why, just wants to convert things into automation code. For me, the bad smell there is any engineer on a team not being interested in the holistic picture of how a system fits together is not going to end up with good quality in the long run. The nitpicker is, I described a few moments ago, the nitpicker, everything's a problem, and they won't let go of it. Everything has to be fixed and everything has to be utterly perfect before it can go out to the end user. By which point you've probably spent 3 years developing and your users have gone off to other systems and the business has collapsed. I have come across people like that. They're not all bad. There are situations where you do need people like that, and the best one I can think of is a trading company, an electronic trading company I worked for, where there was one instance of an error in a real life log, and the instruction I was given was spend all week attempting to recreate this error and then work out how we fix it. Because in a trading company, the two most critical things are outages or loss of money. And this one error related to an outage, so we needed to be able to reproduce it. The nitpicker type of stereotype, absolutely perfect for that. The holistic view, less useful. The expert, not just a quality engineer, bad smell. That's every role everywhere has the potential for that candidate that knows everything. The problem with the experts is they don't tend to be much of a team player. It tends to be, I told you this was a problem, you should have listened to me. And we don't want those kind of non-team players. Likewise, the enforcer isn't a team player. The enforcer is that quality gatekeeper of, you can't release this until I've tested it. We want our quality engineers to work with the other engineers in our team. We want them to help everyone raise their quality game. And some of that involves trusting team members, trusting that when you've taught something through, that they're doing what the team believes is the right thing for the quality in that team. The quality engineer doesn't need to stand there and say, unless I certify it, it's not going live. So I asked our quality engineers about misconceptions that bug them. And some of the biggest ones were that quality engineers are the only ones that test. Signing off releases is a pet phrase that's particularly hated. Quite a lot of quality people have bad experience in their career history of quality engineers slow down development. They can only test completed features because they can't code. And those are the kind of negative comments that lead to situations you have right now where I'm seeing a lot of people in the quality space being made redundant ahead of the developers because they're seen as disposable or slowing down the development. So just keep a few hardcore developers who can do everything. It feels particularly bad for the quality engineers that are being laid off, and it's short-sighted from the companies that are doing it. And that kind of comes on to that final statement of, once software engineers learn to test, quality engineers are no longer required. I would say that I have heard similar things about designers. Front-end engineers can create UIs. We don't need designers. I think with any role and overlap, there can be a lot of those kind of negative statements. And we're hoping to address those at Cazoo by the quality engineer being more of a mini coach within the team. So to counter some of those misconceptions, we're going for the attitude that anyone can test. Quality engineers are specialists. If you take the rule, I can't remember where it comes from. I wish I could remember. 10,000 hours of practice makes you a master at something. If you take that theory, quality engineers have specialized in testing skills for far longer than software engineers. So they're a specialist on that side. Vice versa, software engineers have spent far more hours coding than a lot of quality engineers. So they're the specialist on the code side. My ideal is that both quality engineers and software engineers can learn from each other and upskill each other. Quality engineers don't sign off releases because quality is defined and protected by the whole team. And we're doing that by talking about quality and risks at the point that we're refining stories, as well as talking about it throughout development and through to deployment. It's not the quality engineers themselves in their roles that slow down development. It's discovering unknowns that slow down development. if we come back to that 10,000 hours of practice, quality engineers have more experience and practice digging out those risks and those unknowns. And if business decisions are made to address some of those knowns during the development, that will inevitably slow it down because the development activity is expanding. Quality engineers can't code. In theory, anyone can code. If you look at the number of boot camps out there and the number of messaging to schools that every child should now exit school knowing how to code. As I mentioned, software engineers are specialists with code. It may be true that anyone can code. It doesn't mean everyone wants to or everyone's skills lie best that way. I firmly say of myself, I can code, I shouldn't code. I am a bad coder. I code to the point that the thing works. I don't care about maintainability or security or whether it's using the right libraries. If it's me coding, I stop at the point that it meets the functional need because what I needed is done. I am a very bad coder. I am great at pairing with coders because I appreciate the art of the code they produce. Leave that specialism with them and I help with everything else. You can only test completed code or features. The theory is you can test anything. How, when, and where is the more appropriate question. You can test an idea, and we'll come on to that in a little bit. One of our quality engineers used the phrase catalyst, that he believes quality engineers are catalysts for continuous improvement, and I think that's a lovely one. So our ideal quality engineers that we've been hiring for our web-facing teams, having people with automation skills is very important just because of the sheer volume of UI and cross-browser stuff that we need to be able to automate. We don't want people doing manually, and we need someone to help upskill our software engineers in that UI automation as well. Most of our back-end quality engineers are stronger on the exploratory testing side because the back-end side of things is more about the logic and the systems thinking than it is about automating flows. Most of the automation on the back-end side is contract testing or API testing. So we were looking for people with skills on both sides, but fully appreciative that people are normally more one than the other. So we were also looking for people that had a growth mindset and could learn. So any questions about that before I go on to how we're actually working? Nope. So how our quality engineers are working within the teams themselves. A friend of mine drew out a model of DevOps process of the continual cycle from planning to coding to releasing to the observability and continually going round and round. The most common question you get is where does testing and where does quality fit within that cycle? And normally most people that I've seen do diagrams like this, they try and insert tests somewhere at that intersection between the pure dev and pure ops side of the cycle. What Dan Ashby did was he point out that actually there's a form of testing in every single part of that cycle. And if we look at why, and by we test here, both software and quality engineers, I mean. Any software starts with an idea, be it like Cazoo's founder deciding what he wants the company to do next, or someone within the team having an idea of a new library or monitoring tool or something that could be used that would help the team work better and smoother. Everything starts with an idea. Oops. We flesh out that idea with Three Amigos type conversations, with BDD scenarios, maybe testing other products to see how they do things so we can compare. All of those involve forms of testing. All of those involve forms of hypotheses and working through scenarios and then deciding whether or not to proceed. If you decide to proceed, you start documenting more formal requirements. Maybe you get architecture diagrams, business process flows. Maybe at this point you're getting feature files created. You might be working with the concept of personas, be it security-based, UX-based. You're still testing, as you're still having conversations and looking at what's possible while you're putting these things together. The very act of drawing out an architecture diagram for something that doesn't exist yet is a form of prototype and test. And then when you actually build and release, you have integration checks and unit checks in place. There's pairing, there's code reviews, there's logs to look at and ask questions of. And it's information that's being surfaced, and everything ties back to that original idea. So when we think about the different parts of the DevOps lifecycle and the kind of testing that you can do at each stage, it's these kinds of things that we're referring to as testing. And when we're looking at a risk-based approach to quality, the entire point is to raise the risks, to surface those risks so you know what you need to do to address them. And there's an analogy with using car headlights, that in the beam of the headlights, those are your known high risk issues that you probably know from the start of that initial idea. You have to put the full beams on to get some more of the suspected high risks and to pick up the low risk known issues. So if you think about that, you're widening the circle of conversation to include maybe other teams, maybe conversations with people in the industry. The bit where you get most of the problems is the unknown risks. It's the place where the headlights don't reach. And generally, some of the biggest issues that I've ever encountered in production, they're the unknown unknowns, and they're the things that really bite you because you had no way to prepare for them. One of the things I'm loving about Cazoo is the focus on observability, which means when those unknown unknowns happen, we're finding out fast so that we can then adapt and cope with them. So when you're talking about a risk-based approach to quality, the quality engineers are trying to surface as much as they can within all the knowns and the unknowns, but then helping the team focus on the risk-based approach of what to target. And it becomes obvious that the known high risks, most of the time, you have to address, even if you're a fast-moving startup. But if the information about the risks isn't surfaced, you're not making an informed decision. And then that comes back round to the testing versus checking flame war. And both are needed. So checking activities are scripted tests that could be run by a human or could be run by a machine. When we're doing TDD, although it's called test-driven development, those tests that are being written, they're checks. They are logical checks for input versus output, something happening. When in the quality space, we're talking about testing activities, we're talking about exploratory things that uncover information. And that information goes back to inform more testing activities, but it also goes into informing and enabling checking activities. Because once our testing has uncovered information, if that information is something we need to repeatedly check, we don't want to do that through a testing activity using cognitive load. We want to pass that to a machine. We want to do that check as fast as possible by a machine. So any questions on that?
Was this section was the role of the QE, right? So so you say you have one per team?
Yes.
And then your role is the coach, and you work across all of them?
Yeah. Yeah, so I work across all the teams. I have touch points with the quality engineers themselves and with the engineering and product managers in the teams. But the wider teams as a whole, I don't get involved with unless asked in to help. I will more enable the quality engineer to drive improvements within the team themselves.
So they know their own team and what they're working on, and so your primary thing is to like bring that in as a whole, to like disseminate what attitude and like high level things, or
a form of so we're putting together some culture documentation at Cazoo at the moment for what we want engineering culture to look like and how we're going to try and get there. A lot of what I do with the quality engineers themselves is make sure that they've got the resources and the knowledge they need and the confidence as well to deal with the team, because they're not in a position of responsibility. They're not, when they try and enact quality changes within their team, they don't have the authority that an engineering manager might have. And quite often bringing change within a team is hard, especially where a lot of our software engineers have never worked with quality engineers before at all. So it can be quite new. So I help the quality engineers structure how they're going to bring in that change, help with their confidence, help with the techniques, and if they need assistance, I'll go in with them to run workshops and things. Hopefully that made sense.
Yep, thank you.
So what I'll do just to bring this to a close, I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey. There are a hell of a lot of different types of testing out there in the world. And when we started talking about career progression for quality engineers, it's an awkward topic. So I wanted to highlight that quality mastery is a journey and it's not an end point, and that journey can go through many different phases that help build up that experience. So I wanted to do this using some of those stereotypes. So when I started out, when I first transitioned to doing testing as my main role, I had a reputation as the person that could break anything, that all I had to do was open up the system and touch something and it would fall over in a heap screaming. And there's a stereotype of the magician with favorite phrase, I don't look for defects, they just find me. There's really no such thing as a magical tester. There really isn't a a wondrous magic wand that means you can make a system just fall over. I think that at this point, what enabled me to find problems in systems was the fact that I was curious. If I saw something, generally my thought was, I wonder what that does, click it, and it normally did something it wasn't meant to do, because the action had stood out to me because it looked different to the rest of the system. And normally the systems we were creating at that time, if something looked different, it was because it wasn't finished or it hadn't been done properly. So that magpie mentality of, I wonder what that does, that curiosity is actually what was driving my behaviors at that time. When I got better at what I did, and when I went off and did the ISTQB course to learn what I was meant to be doing, for context, I was the only person focusing on testing in the company. No one had ever really focused on it before, and the MD wanted me to find a course so that I could make sure I was doing it properly if it was going to become my real role, and the ISTQB was the only thing out there. Well, it was called ISEB at the time. And that took me onto a little bit of a path into being the checklister of, I couldn't test everything, and people didn't always want to have to talk to me to get an update on how things were going. Sometimes they wanted to go to a dashboard. So in order to facilitate a dashboard and in order to get other people to help me test, I had to have checklists. I had to have repeatable written down test cases. And checklists are good. Checklists make sure you don't forget things. Checklists make sure that when you create new AWS accounts and create new S3 buckets, that you don't leave them open to the public when you put personal information in there. Checklists are a good thing. Only using checklists for a testing activity isn't so good because it stifles that curiosity and it stifles that ability to explore, because you get a bit tunnel visioned on the checklist says everything's okay, so everything must be okay. Checklists by their very nature, when you have complicated systems, you end up with a lot of checklists. If you end up with a lot of checklists, that's a lot of maintenance to keep them up to date when your systems change. If there's a lot of maintenance to do before you can test, it tends to not get done. And then you have tests that no longer have any value. Obviously, I became the enforcer along my path. Once I thought I was good at what I was doing, I was the one that was stopping builds going out if there were problems remaining. I was the one talking about what our quality levels meant. It's a trait I still retain to a little bit. So a few weeks ago at Cazoo, I used my enforcer hat to ensure that a couple of teams didn't go down a rabbit hole on a piece of urgent change before teams had talked to each other and come up with a coordinated response. Sometimes that enforcer hat still needs to come out, but it isn't what I completely am. What I ended up being was the networker, sharing the quality love across teams. And one of the biggest values I can bring at Cazoo is helping make sure teams talk to each other. We've got 10 product engineering teams. If each team was also staying up to date with what was going on in every other team, as well as what they were trying to do in their team, they'd actually never get anything built. One of the values I can add is with that cross-functional linking up between product areas. And and I can help drive our quality that way by making sure that that holistic view across the entirety of product engineering is complete and we don't have anything falling through the gaps. So that's my journey, and that's the end of what I was going to show you.
So yeah, I've been mentoring the apprentices from time to time, and yeah, like this is our second week of the QA 2 weeks, QE, sorry. I wanted to ask, I know that the answers are very context dependent, but if you do anything at Cazoo around accessibility and how you test for accessibility.
Not yet.
Okay.
We want to get better at it. We've started looking into I've forgotten the name of it. I will find the name of it and send it to Aurelia with my other links. There's a couple of tools we've found recently that we're looking at integrating into the pipeline to highlight some standard accessibility issues to us. But we have grand aims of having like AA, AAA accessibility rating, but we've got a pragmatic approach of what we actually need to do is figure out how bad we are at the moment and then our steps to get to good.
Okay, cool. And then pretty much a kind of similar thing. So one of the points we've been discussing last week is around automated UI testing and how flaky they can be and how hard to maintain they can be. What kind of things do you guys do about that? Do you have a lot of automated UI tests? And if you do, why?
So one of the things I did when I first came in, there was a lot of grumbling about end-to-end testing across all the different teams, and I'm not a fan of big UI tests because they're just, end of the day, they're false confidence, especially on websites. How many actual customers go through the exact steps that you set up your UI test for? Actual humans, they dot around a lot more, and they definitely don't operate at the same speed of clicking that automation does. What I've been pushing is that each team should we're operating within bounded contexts, so each team should have very clear boundaries. Within those boundaries, I've asked each team to look at the routes through their boundaries and across any other third-party systems or anything like that. Once they've looked at their routes through, I asked them to prioritize them. And you had some obvious priorities, like the main website, you ought to be able to see the details of a car and click to buy it. For the checkout, from the point of someone clicking buy, you need to be able to get through to pay with happy path information. And what we've encouraged people to do is those main high priority routes, do look at automating those, but we wouldn't expect teams to have more than one or two across boundary UI tests. If they have more, it's just going to slow down the pipeline. It's just going to be false confidence. And actually, the observability side will give us far more warning about stuff going wrong. I've forgotten the other part. Oh, the other bit I was going to say is the analogy I've been using with people is to treat it like a Lego brick, to treat the entire system like a Lego brick wall. And you've got the checkout Lego brick, and you've got the finance Lego brick, and you've got the big platform bar that everything sticks on top of. And if everyone has that critical path automated between their boundaries, then we're assuring that complete end-to-end journey by looking at the Lego bricks stacking up. And in between the bricks, that's where the contract testing comes into place.
Thank you.
That's all right.
Cool. I have a question. So I'd like to start by saying that the experience I had of quality at Cazoo was very positive. The thing that I still find surprising is that it's one quality engineer per team. And it's just my experiences in the past that have got me here, but I've worked on teams where you have an almost even balance of software engineer and quality engineer. And I've seen the quality engineers skill up and learn so much from having senior quality engineers, principal quality engineers, I saw a principal move kind of between teams, and kind of they didn't have someone in a coach role who was kind of the closest thing to that. But within those teams, you had like more senior engineers who kind of got the concepts, only need to hear it once, and their mind was expanded. And then more junior ones who had the right attitude, but they weren't going to kind of get there by themselves. So in that scenario, our quality engineers, they didn't only pair with themselves. We would generally kind of, mix up the pairs, the whole team paired, cross-discipline. But yeah, I think the reason why I'm most surprised to kind of see anyone suggest a team that just has one quality engineer is like, well, where did the senior quality engineers come from then? There is such a thing as a really good junior quality engineer, but who are they going to learn from? How they're going to scale up without there being, kind of others? And yeah, they could learn from software engineers and community and stuff like that. But I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on that.
At Cazoo, we have product engineering is 65 strong, and in the last month we've just picked up 2 junior software engineers, but even they are 2-3 years into their career. We're not looking at that progression at the moment. All of our quality engineers and software engineers, for the most part, are mid-level and above. We haven't got that bit figured out. One of the difficulties I have that goes along with that is we're trying not to have a separate quality community of practice. If we don't want to silo quality and software engineering, everyone is in the one engineering community of practice where everyone can learn from each other. I think we may have to address that longer term because of the imbalance of numbers. In order for the quality engineers to share their skills, I think that is going to have to change. And if not before, if we get any juniors in, it will definitely have to change at that point. But yeah, that's one we've not figured out yet. But equal numbers of quality and software engineering sounds cool. The best I've ever been in is 2.5 to 1 ratio.
Yeah. I've never worked in a faster team. It took a while to form, but it was good. Highly recommend it.
Awesome. Cool. I think no more questions. I'll leave you to it then.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicola, for joining us and just sort of explaining to us what QE is at Cazoo. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank
I'll
you.
see you later.
Thank you very much.